The first time I realized my girlfriend might have invented most of her childhood, her dad was standing 10 feet away from us, holding a tray of burgers. He wasn't confronting her. He wasn't even talking to her. He was telling me about the time 12-year-old Claire backed his truck into their mailbox. Claire had told me she didn't meet these people until she was 14. I looked across the patio at her. She'd been laughing maybe 30 seconds earlier. Now she was sitting completely still, with both hands wrapped around a can of Coke. Her dad kept going. Apparently she'd taken his keys because she wanted to move the truck 3 feet so she could get her bike out of the garage. She put it in reverse instead of drive, flattened the mailbox, and spent the next hour trying to stand the thing back up before her parents came home. Her mom laughed from the grill. "You should have seen her face when we pulled in." Claire looked at me. Not at them. At me. That was the moment I knew there was going to be a conversation on the drive home. Because according to the woman I'd been dating for 6 months, none of that could have happened. Claire had told me she was born in Romania. Her biological father disappeared when she was little. Her mother died when she was 9, and she bounced between relatives and temporary homes until an American couple adopted her. The couple currently grilling hamburgers 20 feet from me. According to Claire, she'd arrived in the United States at 13 and moved in with them shortly before turning 14. She'd told me that story on our 4th date. Not dramatically either. That's probably why I believed it. We'd been eating tacos when I asked why she occasionally pronounced certain words differently. She shrugged and said English technically wasn't her first language. Then she told me everything. She'd lost most of her family young. She didn't like talking about the years afterward. Her adoptive parents had tried hard, but their relationship was complicated because they'd wanted her to forget where she came from. She'd even changed her name back to Claire after they supposedly gave her a more American name. There were details. Too many details, looking back. She remembered the airport. The first American cereal she'd eaten. The bedroom her adoptive mother decorated without asking what colors she liked. I remember thinking she had been through more before high school than I'd been through in 34 years. I'm Daniel, by the way. I'm 34. Claire was 31. We met through a mutual friend at a birthday dinner in Columbus. She was funny without trying too hard, had a stable job managing scheduling for a medical office, owned a small condo, and seemed unusually independent. There was no obvious chaos around her. That mattered to me. I'd gotten out of a relationship 2 years earlier, with someone who could turn picking a restaurant into a congressional hearing. I wasn't looking for excitement anymore. Claire seemed steady. 6 months later, I was sitting at her parents' house, listening to stories from a childhood she supposedly hadn't spent with them. I didn't confront anybody. Instead, I did something I'm not especially proud of. I started asking questions. How old was she when that happened? Her dad thought about it. 6th grade, right? 7th, her mom said. Claire stood up. I'm grabbing another drink. Nobody seemed to notice anything strange. Her dad told another story about Claire and her cousin getting caught sneaking into the community pool after dark. That one happened when she was 11. Then her mother mentioned Claire's elementary school. I stopped asking questions after that. On the drive home, Claire lasted about 4 minutes. My parents do this weird thing. I kept my eyes on the road. What thing? They take stories my biological mom wrote down and tell them like they happened here. That explanation was so specific, I almost admired it. Where did they get the stories? My mom's journals. Your biological mom? Yeah. And your parents have them? They were sent with some of my documents? I nodded. She kept talking. They've always been uncomfortable telling people I'm adopted. It's like they want this normal family history, so they sort of absorbed my childhood. Your dad said you backed his truck into a mailbox. He changes details. What about the elementary school? I visited before I officially moved here. That was the first answer that made absolutely no sense. I didn't argue. Claire looked out the passenger window. After another mile, she said, "You don't believe me." I didn't say that. You don't have to. We stopped at a red light. I remember looking at her and realizing I had two choices. I could start cross-examining someone I cared about, or I could give her one chance to tell me whatever was actually going on. So I said, "If the story you've told me isn't true, that doesn't automatically mean we're done." She didn't answer. I care about who you are now, but I need to know who I'm actually dating. Her eyes stayed on the window. Then she said, "I told you the truth." The light changed. I dropped her at work because she was covering an evening shift. She kissed me before getting out of the car. Normal kiss, normal goodbye. Then at 11:47 that night, she called and asked if she could come over. She arrived carrying a folder. Inside was her birth certificate, Ohio. Same county where her parents still lived. There were also school pictures. Claire at 7 with missing front teeth. Claire at 10 in a soccer uniform. Claire at 13 standing between the same two people I'd eaten hamburgers with that afternoon. She sat at my kitchen table and said, "I made it up." I didn't say anything. She started crying, but quietly. Claire wasn't normally a crier. The real story, according to her, was that she'd had a terrible relationship with her parents as a teenager. At 15, she ran away and stayed in her best friend's basement for several months. Her friend's parents eventually realized the situation couldn't continue. There was talk about calling social services and sending Claire home. Claire panicked. She told some kids at school that the people looking for her weren't actually her parents. Then she added that she'd been adopted. Then she added another country. By the time she went home, the story had spread through her social circle. Instead of admitting she'd lied, she kept it. New school, same story. College, same story. New friends, same story. She said it became easier than explaining why she'd started lying in the first place. I asked the obvious question. "Why tell me?" She stared down at her hands. "Because everyone I know knows that version." That answer bothered me more than I expected. Not because it was a lie. Because it meant she'd looked at me 6 months earlier and consciously decided which Claire I was going to meet. Still, I understood how a stupid lie at 15 could become humiliating to undo at 31. Or I thought I did. She promised that was the only major thing she'd lied about. I believed her enough to say we didn't have to make any decisions that night. I did tell her I wanted her to talk to somebody professionally. Not because I thought she was crazy. Because maintaining a fake childhood for 16 years seemed like something you shouldn't try fixing with a podcast and better sleep. She agreed immediately. Before she left, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for not thinking I'm a monster." I told her I didn't. At 1:30 in the morning, I was still sitting at my kitchen table. The folder was gone. But one thing she'd said kept bothering me. She'd claimed everyone in her life knew the adoption story. That wasn't true. Her parents didn't. Which meant Claire had already been maintaining different versions of herself, depending on who was in the room. And once I noticed that, I started remembering other things. I slept maybe 4 hours. By morning, I had a list in my phone. I know that sounds insane. It wasn't a detective board with red string. I wasn't zooming in on reflections and Instagram pictures. I just wrote down things Claire had told me that had seemed slightly off at the time. There were 11. Most were probably nothing. One definitely wasn't. Claire had told me she'd served in the Army. Not a full career. 4 years after college. She said she'd spent 8 months in Afghanistan doing logistics and didn't like talking about it. I'd never pushed. My older brother was a Marine, and one of the first things he taught me was that people who've been somewhere ugly don't owe strangers a presentation about it. But Claire had talked about Afghanistan when she wanted to. Specific roads, specific bases. A mortar attack that supposedly damaged the building she was sleeping in. She'd once corrected a documentary we were watching because, according to her, the landscape around Kabul didn't look like that in winter. At the time, I'd thought, well, she'd know. Now I opened the folder in my head marked, maybe not. That afternoon, we met during her lunch break. I didn't want to drag this out. We sat in my car behind her office because apparently every major conversation in my adult life eventually happens in a parking lot. I asked her one question. Besides your childhood, is there anything else you've lied to me about? She looked genuinely offended. No. Nothing? I told you everything last night. I waited. She rubbed her forehead. Daniel, I know you're going to question everything now, but I can't prove every conversation we've ever had. Army. She froze. It was subtle. If I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. What about it? Were you in Afghanistan? Yes, I nodded. What unit? She looked at me for a second. Then she said, Seriously? My brother asked you that at Thanksgiving. I don't remember. You told him you were attached to the 82nd. I probably was. Probably. I had never heard a veteran say they were probably attached to a unit. Claire. She looked down. No. That was lie number 2. She'd been in the Army Reserve for less than a year. She never deployed. According to her new explanation, she'd told people she deployed because she was embarrassed about leaving early after a knee injury. I didn't know whether the knee injury was real. I moved to the next thing. You owned part of a coffee importing business in your 20s. Her face changed again. My uncle did. You said you did. I helped. How? Website stuff. Orders. So you didn't own it? No. Claire crossed her arms. This feels like you're trying to humiliate me. I'm trying to figure out which parts of the last 6 months happened. She stared through the windshield. I asked about the BMW she'd supposedly bought for her mother. Her dad bought it. The lake cabin she and her brother supposedly inherited from an aunt. Her parents rented one for 3 summers. The scholarship that paid for college? Partial scholarship. Her parents paid most of the rest. Then, I asked about the scar. That was the one I didn't want to ask about. Claire had a thin scar low on the left side of her abdomen. On her second date, she'd told me an ex-boyfriend had stabbed her. He'd supposedly become obsessive after they broke up. He followed her for months, broke into her apartment, and eventually attacked her in the parking lot outside a grocery store. She said he went into psychiatric treatment after being arrested. I'd heard that story more than once. So had my friends. At a barbecue, someone asked about the scar because it showed slightly above her swimsuit. Claire told the whole thing. Not every detail, but enough. That story had influenced how I treated her. I didn't show up unannounced. I never joked about checking her phone. When she said she hated feeling controlled, I gave her space because I thought I understood where that fear came from. What happened to your stomach? She closed her eyes. Don't. What happened? My ex did cut me. With what? I don't remember. You told me it was a hunting knife. It was something like that. Was he arrested? No. That answer landed harder than the others. Why not? Because I didn't report it. You told me you testified. She snapped her head toward me. I was scared, okay? I didn't raise my voice. Did he stalk you? Yes. Did he stab you? He cut me. Did you almost die? Silence. Claire. No. I sat there looking at the dashboard. A delivery truck backed into the loading dock behind us. Somebody leaned on a horn out on the street. Normal Tuesday. Claire started explaining. The relationship had been toxic. He'd shown up places. They fought constantly. During one argument, there'd been a physical struggle, and she got cut on a broken piece of glass. Maybe that was the problem now. Every explanation came from the same person who'd created the original lie. There was no bottom. My phone buzzed. It was a work reminder for a meeting in 15 minutes. I almost laughed. Nothing makes a personal crisis feel more ridiculous than Microsoft Teams reminding you that you're expected to discuss quarterly vendor costs. Claire reached for my hand. I moved it. Not dramatically. I just put my hand on the steering wheel. She noticed. Please don't do this. Do what? Turn me into some horrible person because I exaggerated things. Afghanistan isn't an exaggeration. I know. Being stabbed nearly to death isn't an exaggeration. I know. Being adopted isn't an exaggeration. She looked down. I know. I asked whether there was anything else. She said no. Then I asked about her master's degree. She started crying. That was number 6. There was no master's degree. She'd taken 3 graduate classes and dropped the program. I asked about the house. For months, Claire had been talking about buying a house. She'd sent me Zillow listings. We'd walked through an open house together 2 weeks earlier. She talked about wanting a fenced yard because I had a dog. She'd told me she'd been pre-approved for $410,000. No pre-approval. She hadn't even applied. She had about $19,000 in credit card debt. I hadn't known about that either. At that point, I stopped asking. Not because I was satisfied. Because I realized I could keep naming things until one of us had to go back to work. Claire kept saying the same thing. None of the lies changed how she felt about me. That may have been true. It also wasn't the point. I told her we were done. She said, no. Not angrily. Like I'd misunderstood the situation. We don't have to break up. I do. You said last night this didn't change who I am. Last night I thought you lied about one thing when you were 15. I can fix this. Maybe. I'll go to therapy. You should. I'll tell everybody. Okay. I'll tell my parents, my friends, everybody. Okay. She stared at me. Apparently, okay was not the answer she wanted. Then she said something that finally made the entire situation clear. You can't leave me over things that happened before you. I looked at her. The lies happened with me. She had no response to that. I went back to work. At 5:20, she texted, asking if we could talk. At 5:24, she sent another message saying she'd already contacted a therapist. At 5:31, she sent a screenshot of an appointment request. At 5:46, she told me she'd started writing a list of everyone she needed to apologize to. I didn't answer. At 6:10, my brother called. He'd gotten a message from Claire. She wanted his advice about how to correct her military record misunderstanding with me. I asked him what exactly she'd told him. There was a long pause. Then he said, Dan, what the hell is going on? Apparently, Claire hadn't just told my brother she'd deployed. She'd told him she'd been injured there. Nothing major, she'd said. Concussion. 2 cracked ribs. My brother had spent 20 minutes talking to her about nightmares after deployment. He'd shared things with her he'd never told me. When I explained what I'd learned, he went completely quiet. Then he said, You need to get away from this. I already had. What I didn't know yet was that Claire wasn't finished lying. She was just running out of lies I knew how to ask about. The next morning, I went to Claire's condo to get my stuff. I had a key, but I texted first. She replied almost immediately. "Come in." That was unusual enough that I stood outside for a second before unlocking the door. Claire was sitting on the couch. There were tissues on the coffee table, and her laptop was open. She looked like she'd been awake all night. "I made the list." "I didn't ask what list." She turned the laptop toward me. There were names in a document: her parents, her brother, 3 friends, 2 coworkers, me, my brother. A few names I didn't recognize. Beside each name, she'd written what she'd supposedly lied to that person about. I read maybe half the page. Different people had different versions. One coworker thought Claire had been engaged before. She hadn't. One friend thought she'd lived in Germany for 2 years. She'd visited for 11 days. Her brother apparently believed she'd told me the truth about their childhood. Her parents thought I knew nothing about the adoption story because, obviously, there was no adoption. It wasn't one fake life. It was several. I asked why. She said she didn't know. Then she said she did know. She'd always felt boring. Her brother had been the athletic one. Her cousin was the smart one. Her best friend in high school had the chaotic family everybody worried about. Claire said she learned early that people listened when something bad happened. I didn't respond. She quickly added, "I'm not saying that's an excuse." It sounded like something she'd practiced during the night. I went upstairs and started packing. Toothbrush, 2 shirts, running shoes, phone charger. The depressing little inventory of a relationship that had reached the leave your stuff at her place stage, but not the own anything together stage. Claire followed me. "I really do love you." "I believe you." She stopped. That seemed to confuse her. "You do?" "Yeah." I did. That's what made it worse. I didn't think every emotion she'd ever had was fake. I thought she'd built a habit of changing reality whenever reality made her uncomfortable. Love doesn't automatically fix that. She sat on the edge of the bed. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "Before we got married." We had never been engaged. We talked about marriage in the vague way adults in their 30s do when they're checking whether a relationship has somewhere to go. I put my charger in my backpack. "Which part?" "Everything. You didn't tell me yesterday until I named each lie. I panicked. You told me there was nothing else. I was scared you'd leave. And then I left because you lied again." She didn't argue. I thought that was the end of it. Then my phone buzzed. A Facebook message from a woman named Megan. I recognized the name. Claire's former roommate. I'd never met her. The message said, "Hey, sorry this is weird. Claire called me this morning and said, you 2 are having problems because of some old stories. She asked me to confirm something if you contact me. I don't want to be involved in whatever this is. I think you should know she asked." I read it twice. Then I showed Claire. Her face went blank. "What did you ask Megan to confirm?" "Nothing." I held the phone up. "Try again." She walked out of the bedroom. I followed her downstairs. She stood in the kitchen with her back to me. Finally, she said, "The miscarriage." I didn't understand. "What miscarriage?" Claire turned around. And there it was. Another story I'd never heard. Apparently, she'd told some people that she'd gotten pregnant at 24 and miscarried. She had asked Megan years ago to back up the story because Megan had been her roommate then. Megan refused. Claire had contacted her that morning because she thought I might somehow hear about it. That was the point where I stopped feeling like I was dealing with a relationship problem. This was something else. I asked whether she'd actually been pregnant. She said yes, then no, Then she said she'd had a late period and convinced herself she was pregnant. I didn't ask for another version. I picked up my backpack. Claire blocked the doorway. Not physically. She just stood there. Daniel, please. Move. I'm asking you to give me 1 month. No. 2 weeks. No. Let me start therapy. I hope you do. Then why can't you stay? Because therapy isn't a coupon I redeem for another relationship. She almost smiled. I think under different circumstances she would have laughed. Instead, she moved. I left. By lunchtime, 3 people had contacted me. Claire had apparently started confessing. Sort of. Her friend Ashley messaged me to say Claire had admitted embellishing her military service. Another friend said Claire told her we'd be broken up because I couldn't handle learning that her adoption story was more complicated than she'd originally explained. More complicated. That phrase did a lot of work. I didn't correct anybody. Then my brother sent me a screenshot. Claire had texted him. She apologized for letting him believe she'd been injured overseas, but said she'd actually been told by a recruiter that she was likely to deploy and mentally experience the fear as if deployment were inevitable. My brother replied with 2 words. Don't contact me. That evening, Claire's mother called. I'd given her my number months earlier when we were coordinating a surprise birthday dinner. She sounded embarrassed. Daniel, can I ask you something? Sure. Claire says you 2 broke up because we told you private information about her childhood. I closed my eyes. No. Silence. Then I said, I think you should talk to Claire. We've been trying. Apparently Claire had called her parents that afternoon. She told them I'd become obsessed with proving she was lying after the barbecue and was contacting people behind her back. Technically, I hadn't contacted anyone. People were contacting me, but that distinction felt less important than the rest. Her mother asked what Claire had told me. I hesitated. It wasn't my job to expose every lie. Then she said, Did she tell you we adopted her? I said yes. Her mother sighed. Not surprised. Just tired. She's done that before. That sentence changed everything again. Before? When she was younger. Claire had told me the lie began when she was 15 and simply got out of control. Her mother said, It started earlier. At 13, Claire told a summer camp counselor that her parents were foster parents. At 16, she told a boyfriend her father was abusive. At 19, she told college friends her brother had died. Her brother was alive. I'd met him twice. Her parents had spent years trying to get her into counseling. Claire would go for a few sessions, then stop. Sometimes she'd admit things. Sometimes she'd insist everybody else misunderstood her. Her mother said the family eventually stopped challenging every story because it turned every holiday into a trial. I sat on my couch listening to a woman explain the last 18 years of her daughter's life. Then she said something I still think about. She's not lying every second, Daniel. That's what makes this so difficult. I understood exactly what she meant. Claire really did work at the medical office. She really did own her condo. She really loved gardening. She really hated mushrooms. She really called her grandmother every Sunday. She really knew how I took my coffee. There was a real person in there. I just couldn't tell where she ended and the stories began. Before hanging up, her mother apologized. I told her she didn't owe me one. Then I asked whether Claire had ever gotten professional help for any meaningful amount of time. No. That was enough for me. I blocked Claire's number, then Facebook, Instagram, email. I thought I'd closed every door. 3 days later, an Amazon package showed up at my house. Inside was a framed picture of Claire and me from a weekend trip to Nashville. There was no note. I put it back in the box. An hour later, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. Did you get it? I didn't answer. Another message came. I know you're angry, but you need to hear what actually happened. Then another. My mother lied to you. I didn't respond to the new number. That turned out to be the smartest thing I did that week. Claire sent 14 messages over the next 2 hours. I read them because apparently I still had some capacity for making bad decisions. According to this version, her mother had always been controlling. Her family had spent years telling people Claire was dishonest whenever she tried to talk about what happened at home. The adoption story wasn't literally true, but it represented how disconnected she'd felt from her parents. The Army story came from trauma around being discharged. The stabbing story was mostly true. The miscarriage story was emotionally true, because she'd believed she was pregnant. By message 9, I noticed something. Claire wasn't confessing anymore. She was renegotiating definitions. If something represented a real emotion, then the factual details apparently mattered less. If someone misunderstood an exaggeration, that wasn't entirely her fault. If she eventually admitted a lie, that became evidence she was honest. It was impressive in the worst possible way. Then she made a mistake. She mentioned Megan. She wrote that Megan could verify her ex had been violent and that Megan had personally taken her to the hospital after the stabbing. I already had Megan's message, so I replied once. Did you ask Megan to tell me that? 3 dots appeared immediately. No, then, she offered. I sent Megan a screenshot. Megan called me 5 minutes later. I didn't offer anything. That was the first time we'd ever spoken. She sounded exhausted before we'd even finished saying hello. Megan had lived with Claire for almost 3 years. She knew about the lies. Not all of them, but enough. The scar on Claire's stomach wasn't from an ex-boyfriend. It was from an emergency appendectomy when she was 19. I actually laughed when Megan said it. Not because it was funny, because there are moments when your brain refuses to produce the appropriate response. Appendix? Appendix. She told me she was stabbed. Yeah. She told another guy it was a car accident. Apparently, the ex-boyfriend Claire described as a violent stalker had been a fairly normal guy named Eric. The relationship ended badly because Claire cheated. Eric did show up at their apartment once after the breakup to collect a laptop. Megan was there. No attack. No police. No psychiatric institution. Nothing. Megan had stopped being friends with Claire after discovering she'd been telling people Megan had a drug problem. Megan had never had a drug problem. Claire used that story to explain why they no longer lived together. I thanked her. Then I blocked the new number. The next week was quiet. I went to work, went to the gym, watched football with my brother. I deleted pictures from my phone in batches because doing all 1,400 at once felt weirdly administrative. My brother asked whether I missed her. I said yes. He looked surprised. I told him missing someone and trusting them weren't the same thing. That was pretty much the entire conversation. About 2 weeks later, Ashley called. She was one of Claire's closest friends. Claire had finally started telling people we'd broken up. The problem was that every person got a different reason. To Ashley, I was paranoid and controlling. To another friend, I'd been traumatized by a previous relationship and couldn't trust women. To a coworker, we'd mutually decided our future goals were different. To her cousin, I cheated. That one annoyed me. I could accept being the villain in somebody else's private coping mechanism. I wasn't interested in becoming a fictional character in another Claire production. I sent Claire one email. No insults, no threats. I told her I knew she'd been giving different explanations for the breakup. I wasn't going to argue with her or publicly document everything she'd lied about. But if she accused me of cheating, abuse, stalking, or anything else that could damage my reputation, I'd correct the record with evidence. Then I asked her not to contact me again. Her response came 11 minutes later. It was almost 2,000 words. I read the first paragraph. She said my email proved I'd never actually loved her. I deleted it. Another month passed. Then something happened I didn't expect. Claire's dad called. He asked if I had a minute. He told me Claire had started seeing a psychologist. Actually seeing one. Weekly. Her parents had gone with her to one appointment after Claire agreed to it. He wasn't calling to ask me to reconsider the relationship. He made that clear. I don't think you should. That surprised me. He said the family had finally stopped participating in the system they'd built around Claire. No more quietly correcting stories. No more pretending not to notice contradictions. No more calling her friends to smooth things over. If Claire lied, they addressed it. If she blamed somebody else, they didn't argue for 3 hours. They just ended the conversation. Her dad sounded tired, but different. He said Claire had admitted more things. The credit card debt was worse than she'd told me. About $34,000. The condo wasn't fully hers either. Her parents had provided most of the down payment. The medical office job was real, thankfully. At that point, I was happy to learn she hadn't invented Microsoft Outlook. He also told me she'd admitted something about us. Early in our relationship, Claire became convinced I wouldn't stay interested in her if I thought her life was ordinary. So she started choosing stories she thought would make me see her as strong. Surviving an unstable childhood, serving overseas, escaping an abusive ex, building businesses, buying things for her family. They all had the same theme. Claire wanted to be somebody who had survived more, accomplished more, sacrificed more. I thought about our first few dates. I told her I admired how independent she was. I wondered how much that one sentence had fed the machine. Not because I caused it. I wasn't giving myself that much credit. Claire had been doing this long before she met me. But I finally understood why her lies weren't random. She wasn't trying to look rich. She wasn't trying to look famous. She wanted to look resilient. The irony was that the real Claire had plenty of qualities I liked without any of it. She worked 50-hour weeks when her office was understaffed. She took care of her grandmother's groceries. She could replace a garbage disposal without watching YouTube. She once drove 40 minutes because I mentioned I had the flu and left soup and Gatorade outside my door without asking to come in. None of those things needed Afghanistan. Her dad asked if I wanted updates. I said no. Not because I wanted something bad to happen to her. The opposite, actually. I hoped therapy worked. I hoped 5 years from now, Claire could meet somebody and tell him where she was born, without turning it into an international incident. I just couldn't be part of the process. 6 months after the breakup, I ran into her at Target. Of course it was Target. Nothing important in adulthood happens somewhere dignified. I was buying dog food. She was standing near the pharmacy holding a basket. We both saw each other at the same time. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Claire walked over. She looked pretty much the same. Hey. She asked about my dog. I told her he was good. She said she'd heard my brother and his wife were expecting a baby. I said they were. Then there was that awkward silence, where two people who used to sleep in the same bed suddenly have fewer conversational options than coworkers waiting for an elevator. Finally, she said, "I'm still going." I knew what she meant. Therapy? She nodded. Good. I've been wanting to apologize to you. I didn't say anything. She looked at the floor. I lied because I wanted you to think I was more interesting than I was. That was probably the cleanest sentence I'd ever heard from her. No complicated childhood, no misunderstanding, no emotionally true version, just a fact. she continued. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't do anything. It does something, she looked at me. It doesn't put us back together. No. I know. That mattered. Old Claire would have negotiated. 2 weeks? 1 month? One more conversation? This Claire just nodded. She said, I really did love you. I know. Her eyes got wet, but she smiled a little. You always say that, because I believe it. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. I wasn't going to tell her everything was fine either. What happened wasn't fine. But hating her would have required maintaining a relationship with her in my head. And I'd spent 6 months trying to stop doing exactly that. So I said, I hope this works for you. She nodded. Then she walked toward the checkout. I bought my dog food. That was it. Or I thought it was. A few weeks later, Ashley sent me a message. She'd stayed friends with Claire, cautiously. Apparently, Claire had started contacting people she'd lied to over the years. Not to explain, not to ask forgiveness, just to correct things. Ashley said some people accepted the apologies. Some didn't. One former boyfriend blocked her immediately. My brother never responded. Megan told her not to contact her again. Her parents were still involved. There were setbacks. Claire apparently lied to her therapist once about something stupid, got caught in the contradiction the next session, and admitted she'd done it automatically because the real answer embarrassed her. Strangely, that was the update that gave me the most hope. Not because she'd lied again. Because for once the lie didn't become a new reality she had to protect for 15 years. She admitted it, then kept going. I never got back together with her. I need to make that clear because a few friends assumed seeing her again might change things. It didn't. You can understand why somebody hurt you without volunteering to be hurt the same way twice. The relationship had been real to me, but I couldn't build anything on top of it anymore. A year after we broke up, I found the framed Nashville picture in the back of a closet. I'd forgotten about it. I took it out of the box. We were standing outside a restaurant, both smiling at whoever had taken the picture. For a minute, I tried to remember what Claire had told me that weekend. There had probably been lies, maybe several. Then I remembered something else. On the drive home, my tire blew outside Louisville. I was annoyed because it was late and raining. Claire got out with me, held my phone flashlight while I changed it, and made fun of me because I spent 10 minutes looking for a jack that was clipped directly in front of my face. That happened. No fake country, no imaginary deployment, no invented stalker. Just 2 people beside an interstate arguing about whether the spare looked low. I kept the picture, not on a shelf. It went back into the box, but I kept it. Because eventually I stopped needing every memory to be either true or false, based on what Claire had said around it. Some things happened exactly the way I remembered them. Some didn't. And the hardest part wasn't finding out that Claire had lied. It was accepting that the woman I cared about and the woman who lied to me weren't 2 different people. They were the same person. That's why I could still hope she got better. And why I never went back.